Thank you. It's always encouraging. As I read through Scripture and think about it, I'm constantly reminded that God provides, and He does so in ways that require awe and wonder on my part, and I trust it does on your part. He took care of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the nation of Israel, Moses, the judges, the prophets, David, Daniel, and the list can go on. In the life that God has provided for Cecilia and myself, we constantly note that God has provided. So I want to give you a little sketch as to how the fact is that we have been what's called vocational or self-supporting missionaries now since the 1960s. And we've been domestic and foreign. It's amazing to us as we look back how God has provided. Starting the story, back in my last year at Texas Tech, I had accepted a chemical engineering position with Creole Petroleum in Maracaibo, Venezuela. The condition was arrive single. Then I met Cecilia. She had transferred from ACC to finish up some accreditation work she wanted, and she had signed a teaching contract to teach in Hereford, Texas, my hometown. So I figured that God had it in mind that we were going to meet one way or the other, either in Hereford or at Lubbock. We met in Lubbock. So we met at the Bible chair and decided after a short period of time that neither Venezuela nor Hereford was our destination. We wished to get married. So we canceled our contracts. Any of you who've been down this road, I canceled my contract. Then I had to go back begging to previous companies that I had turned down, could you make me an offer again? And that's not a strong negotiating position. Texaco in Port Arthur offered us one. It turned out that the personnel director there was a deacon at the congregation at Proctor Street in Port Arthur. So I think God intervened. Our first daughter was born in late 59, then our twin daughters in late 61. The twins' birth triggered a tax rebate. At the time, it was large, but by today's standards, it was minuscule. But we were able to buy airline tickets to come to Lubbock to show our three girls off. Well, that Sunday at Broadway, Dwayne Evans introduced the concept of Exodus Bayshore. That was a plan whereby self-supporting people from the South and Southwest in the church would move to a town on Long Island and establish a New Testament congregation with the dream that we could have some influence on western Long Island, which would be also part of eastern Manhattan, we could also influence. I think hearing that talk was not an accident. God had that in mind. We decided to follow that dream, so I returned to Texas Tech to get a master's degree in chemical engineering that would help my job search. While we were at Tech, we were extremely short of money. Dean Bradford offered a fellowship to me and some nuclear engineering work. I also taught engineering drafting to the freshmen, and with the grand income of $111 a month, we survived. And some of you can relate to that. In August, I finished my work. I had a business diploma along with a master's in chemical engineering. And my thesis had been published, which was remarkable, and I was actually paid for it. A huge sum of money. I think it's $100. I was at the school clearing out my desk, and Cecilia called me and said, there's a truck here, and the driver said that his instructions are to move us to Long Island today. You know, we had no notice at all. So I called Brookhaven Labs and asked them what was going on. They said, yes, they'd mailed a job offer. It'd be a few days before the mail could get it to us. But I said, the truck's here. What do we do? So they read the job offer to me over the phone. I accepted over the phone. And by the end of the day, we were homeless. Okay. All we had left was our suitcase and our car. Well, en route to New York, our three girls all contracted chickenpox. Now, that meant I had to find motels with the room in the back out of sight And if any of you have a sense of history, the great chickenpox epidemic of 1963 is caused by us. I'd been a deacon at Port Arthur Congregation, and I became a deacon again at the West Islip Congregation. Then in 1965, the West Islip Congregation hosted a World Missions Forum. Now, we learned at that time that South Africa was actively recruiting skilled immigrants. They would pay the airfare, guarantee a job, and waive all customs duties. That sounded interesting to us, so we committed. And short time later, we had our fourth child, our son Harold. He actually grew up in South Africa. He was born in New York, but you ask him, he's Texan. Okay. When he was about 8 months old, we had the approval from the South African government that we could immigrate, and so we did. And the brethren at West Islip gave us $1,000 to help us on our relocation expenses, which was a lifesaver. We got to Johannesburg, and the government said they wanted me to work in a gold mine in the Johannesburg area. And if any of you know about gold mines, that means 1 to 2 miles underneath the surface of the earth. That didn't sound very good. So I flew to Cape Town, where we had committed to go. I interviewed a couple of companies, very interesting. One of them wanted me to go work for South African breweries. But that's a non-starter. I went into a company called Mobile Oil Southern Africa Proprietary Limited. We called it MOSA. And they had created a job 2 days before we got there with some highly selective requirements for the job. And they thought, well, it'll be several weeks before we fill that job. I showed up that week. I had everything they wanted, plus I spoke English, and that really helped. Because some of the immigrants did not. Some of them would speak German or Portuguese or Spanish or Italian, and that helped. My salary was about 40% of what I had in New York. Benefits were less, but God took care of that. God intervened again. Been there about 2 or 3 months, and my supervisor was transferred to New York City, and I got promoted to be the new group leader. Here's a raw immigrant, and I was a group leader in a very different world. We also had interesting, looking back it's funny, but at the time it wasn't. Our apartment leaked like Niagara Falls when it rained. So we had to move, and it turns out that the other oil company, another one of the oil companies in town, Shell Oil, had some rental property, and they rented it to their transferees in and out. As it transpired, through a series of things, we got the house. Shell never appreciated our presence in that house, even though I paid our rent on time every month. They didn't like helping a mobile employee. Every year, one of the employees in Cape Town was given a short-term assignment to go to New York to prepare them for advancement. After we'd been in Cape Town about 2 years, I was informed the company had decided to send me to Manhattan. By the way, everybody in the office knew this before I did. It tells you the grapevine is powerful. God took care of things. We moved back. Dana, our eldest, returned to her farmer school. Melanie and Virginia started there. I commuted into New York City every day by Long Island Railroad, and we had to live in New York on a South African salary. Some of you, again, can relate to that because you don't live on very much. Okay, so see you handle it really well. Then we moved to Durban. It's in South Africa. Then we moved back to Cape Town. Let me tell you about some of our church activities. God took care of a lot of things for us and gave us a lot of opportunities. One of the things that happened was that every Sunday morning at the church there in Cape Town, there was a potential that one of the teachers for the children's classes wouldn't show up. So Cecilia was always on call and had to drop in with no notice to teach class, handle it well. I taught the teens class Sunday morning and Wednesday night for 11 years. And my reaction is, poor kids. They needed a new voice. But anyway, Finally, an American family showed up that had been transferred there on a foreign assignment for a short term, and he took over for about a year and a half, which I appreciated tremendously. Well, what else did we do? I'm talking about vocational missions, and I hope I'm planting some ideas. Annually, we'd drive to Southern Africa Bible College, which is up east of Johannesburg, and we'd take a full combi load. A combi is a big VW van. We just called it a combi. And 1,600-mile round trip, thereabouts. Both of us spoke on the lectureship regularly. And Cecilia was in a local sewing group, tea group in the neighborhood, developed some really good friendships. We tried our best never to appear as ugly Americans. We tried to fit in locally. She had a seniors ministry. Several baptisms came out of that, which we are delighted about. She sang in an area chorus, taught piano. I think we figured out one time she had 111 students or something of that neighborhood. She wrote for the Christian Advocate, which is a national publication for the church in South Africa. Went to about 17 different nations in its distribution. Our children brought their friends to church, and some of you have seen the murals on the hallways here in this end of the building. One of those converts did that. They actually moved here to Lubbock. Our children did really well. They learned South African English. They learned Afrikaans. One of them learned German. I think two of them learned German. And, of course, we spoke Texan at home, so they were multilingual. Now, other than my roles in the congregation, I wrote extensively for the Advocate because I had 40 minutes on the train in to work every morning and 40 minutes back out, and there wasn't much to do on the train, so I wrote articles to be published. And I also managed my business travel, which I had to do quite a lot. And the company didn't really care when I traveled, and when I would go and when I'd get back. Was as long as it didn't increase their cost. So I scheduled seminars on science support scriptures around South Africa, and I coupled that with my business trips. And so it didn't cost the congregations anything, it didn't cost us anything, and the company paid for it. I was asked one time by South African TV and radio to be on a national TV panel concerning the validity of Genesis. I think that went well. And then I was asked to be on a national radio call-in program. I think it lasted about an hour and a half or 2 hours. I was the pro-Bible spokesman against a Darwinian spokesman who's been published several times in the National Geographic. It was a very interesting meeting, and we agreed we'd meet again sometime on radio, but it never worked out. One of the interesting experiences I had, and some of you who've been overseas might be able to relate to some of these things. We had a weekend seminar in Salisbury, Rhodesia, and our goal was to get the local national government to include the creation account in the high schools in their teaching program. We were successful. That was amazing. Unfortunately, the communists took over sometime later and took care of that. I'll get back to that in just a minute. Had a very interesting experience. I didn't really tell the family much, and I hope none of you ever have. As we approached Salisbury, about an hour out, the pilot said all lights will be off, all radio transmission will be off, and we will land in a totally blacked out airport. And if you've ever had an experience of a 30,000-foot dive into a totally blacked out airport with no radio contact, that tends to get your attention. As we left, after the program was over, we also left the same way, totally blacked out, no radio contact, and our takeoff was virtually vertical. The idea was there were terrorists in the area who had pledged to shoot down all aircraft. So it was quite a harrowing experience. Later, I went back to Harare and spoke at a communist high school about the relationship between science and scripture, and several of the students signed up for a correspondence course and the teacher did not block it, which I thought was pretty amazing. 1982, our daughters were at LCU. Our son was facing imminent draft into the South African military, which would have played havoc with his U.S. citizenship. We also had faced a problem. We could send $110 a month per girl to attend LCU. If any of you try to go to LCU for $110 a month to take care of your food, housing, books, tuition, and everything else, you realize that's a bit tough. So we felt like we need to get back to U.S. I asked the company if could they transfer me, and again, God takes care of stuff. I was told at several different levels this is totally impossible because at all levels in mobile corporation worldwide, there's a hiring freeze and a transfer freeze. Nobody can be moved or hired. Nobody. And especially a transfer from the world's least favorite nation. If you remember about that time, South Africa was considered the skunk of the world and not very popular at all. However, God provided. He provided a member of the mobile board. He came to Cape Town. He talked with me and told me, don't worry. So I don't recall exactly how fast it happened, but a very few days later, they organized the transfer. Well, I was forced into the Beaumont, Texas refinery at this particular time, in which the salaries of the higher echelons would be based to some extent on how well they obeyed the rules. Since I was forced in, they weren't obeying the rules, and so they weren't very happy with me. And then immediately afterwards, there was a massive layoff of salaried personnel in Beaumont. I survived. So God took care of things again. 1993, we had the option. I could retire in April or I could retire in May. Have you all ever had that privilege? And that was early. I was really quite young. Anyway, so during 1994, Dwayne Morgan, some of y'all know Dwayne or at least aware of him, he was living in Beaumont at the time because we were having a joint venture of mission work in eastern Indonesia. And Dwayne suggested, why don't we fly up to Lubbock and talk to Klein and see if there's any kind of work that you can do at SIBI. I think we called it SSOP at the time. We flew up. Klein liked the idea. The Sunset Elders liked the idea. The school administration liked the idea. So in September of 94, C and I moved here to Lubbock to start senior aim. Fortunately, there was a lot of work went on. In November of 1994, Truett and I traveled down to Marshall, Texas. And Truett introduced the concept of senior adventures to the sojourners during their annual national workshop. I had the opportunity to present some ideas that I had in addition, and things started developing. So in January of 95, we had our first 8 students. All of them are sojourners. There are pictures right here on the wall. Now, since that time, we've been blessed with literally hundreds of students. We've seen participation in at least 17 different countries of the world because of the Senior Aim ministry, most of the states and the Canadian provinces. We did schedule one workshop. It was 2 weeks after 9/11, and it was in Albany, New York. Not a particularly great time to be traveling to that part of the world. So that was quite an experience for us, and we have a lot of humorous as well as somewhat less humorous kind of stories to tell about that. You can ask to see about some of those. Now, thing is, since that time, we've been blessed with all kinds of efforts and people and couples and teams and individuals. We've had people who've gone for short term, for long term. We had one couple that when they came here, They had no idea what the definition of missions was. They never heard of such a thing. And after a while, they figured out, hey, this is a good deal. Since that time, they've traveled on campaigns in Hawaii. They've been to Ghana several times as team leaders, and they've spent a year in China teaching English. So, and they are what I would call vocational or self-supporting. A short time ago, God again intervened in our world, and He's provided Betty and Brian Garnett to come work with us. And they typically sit over here. And okay, I'm assuming that all of you are aware of them. And we're now able to offer a wider range of courses. We're now able to have a larger impact upon the Lord's church. We're also thankful that there have been at least 2 special ministries that have arisen out of Senior Aim that we can deliberately and knowingly focus on. One is that there's a single mother's ministry here at Sunset. That's a direct outgrowth of Senior Aim. And as you know, the home situation in our country is in desperate trouble. And so this single woman's ministry or single mother's ministry is really filling an important need in the church. Freddie Clements and Jeannie Gage started coming to Senior Aim class. In due course, Jeannie was baptized, and they started a Bible study group up in North Lubbock. They first started out in her apartment. That didn't last long. They got too many people. Then they had to move out into sort of the greeting area. Well, they filled that up pretty fast. And then they had to move to the games room or the fellowship hall. And so now they've got a huge group there. So God provides in all kinds of interesting ways. We also began an international dinner each month in which some of you are aware of this, there are about 600 international students enrolled at Texas Tech. There are probably some at some other colleges, but that's our primary focus. And we found that they all want to learn English, so let's give them English with a Christian perspective. And I think that's working really well. Fortunately, from our side, Dave Gilchrist has moved over, and he's trying to coordinate that. God does provide. I hope all of you realize that in your life. He intervenes. He changes our directions. Sometimes you and I have great and wonderful plans. They just don't turn out because God's got something better for us. Looking back, we've lived, sort of depends on how you count it, we've lived in at least, Cecilia and I, since our marriage, have lived in at least 6 different cultures. We visited about 30 countries, and we find Lubbock, Texas, a great place to live and work. I hope every one of you will speak well of Lubbock when you leave here, and don't do that childish thing of chastising Lubbock. I think that is not a good idea because you've been blessed by being here. This is a tremendous place. And when you look back in 10, 15, 20 years, I think you'll find that God took care of some stuff that you at the time wondered what was going on. But it's going to be better. Okay, it's going to be better. There's no rational reason at all that Cecilia and I can be here at SIBI doing what we're doing, having as much satisfaction as we are having, and we don't have to go seek financial support. That is amazing. In fact, there's no rational reason for it except God took care of it. So I hope that you will think in your life that, boy, you've got some great plans. You're working on some great and wonderful ideas and some things, and don't be disappointed when they change because God's got something better.
Thank you, Stuart.